Time has come once again to speak as witches and wizards do. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 8. I'm Daniel Dubois,
I'm Michaela Gaffinstone.
and we're your hosts for the Think Like a Wizard podcast. And since I already said the episode number, I'll just give you the title, which is Stories.
Stories.
Yeah. So I am starting this off with we'll call it an update. I believe it was episode 2 of this season where we were discussing the after effects of the spell we had cast. And I had said I was watching a show on, I think it was Netflix, and I had skipped back because I didn't understand what the person was saying, and it showed the subtitles so I could read, so I could see what they were saying that I couldn't make out. And I had offered two theories. One was either a result of, one of the thank yous from the spirit world for doing the spell, or it was a feature I didn't know about. Well, it turns out it's actually a feature. This is a new feature going forward with Apple TVs, or since then, where if you skip back to just to see that scene, it'll play the subtitles and then it'll turn them back off again. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we are an earnest podcast. So we're not here to tell you things that aren't true. And if we're wrong, we will correct. Now, in this case, I had offered up two theories. And so I'm just letting you know that if you're going thinking that maybe this was the outcome of the spells we had cast, no, it's just a built-in feature. Because I had said on the episode, I didn't know if it was a built-in feature or not. I couldn't find any documentation to say it was. But it turns out it is. So I just wanted people to know.
Okay.
So,
Very
and
cool.
because we're talking about stories, this kind of either one prevents a story from going forward that isn't true, that this was a reward, quote unquote, for doing the spell, but it's not. So now you know that it's a feature of Apple TV or
Okay.
the device Apple TV and not the app. So I'm putting that out there because that's how my brain works. If I've given you information and I can now correct or at least fill you in on the rest of it, that's what I want to do.
Well, that's what science does. Science gives you the best version of what they understand to be true. And when that changes, and people have the knee-jerk reaction of, see, they're lying to us, blah, 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 blah. No, take a deep breath and look at it again. They're not lying. When a scientist changes their mind, sorry, do you want to hit us? Maybe. Okay, so when a scientist tells you that this is what we know to be true, what they're saying is this is what we know given the range of information we have access to and the things that we can test and our best understanding of those. And when new information comes in, decent scientist is going to put that forward and say, you know what, it wasn't that, it was this. This is what it really looks like. And that's science. And that's what you're doing, is saying, well, this is what it was, either this or this, and here's the answer.
Yeah.
So, and I think we're best served by doing that. So, you say what you think is the best piece of information you have at the time, and it can change. Hopefully it
Yeah.
changes. Otherwise, we're still in the dark ages,
Right. And I want to point out that it can be looked at as an irony because having had a trickster teacher, this is part of what my trickster teacher taught me. Never take for granted what you think you know, especially when it comes to tricksters, right? They'll just take advantage of your willful ignorance to do whatever they'd like. And so it kind of became a thing. And we've said it enough times on the podcast, but it's not necessarily that there's a distinction between being magical and spiritual and being scientific. It's just being spiritual, mystical is another knowledge, body of knowledge that you could apply science to or a scientific methodology to.
Right. Well, human design, I see that as a science because you have the information, right? You receive the information about how your energy works and what's natural for you to do and what just doesn't work for you because you're not built that way. And you go test it. And that is absolutely scientific, right? A hypothesis,
Mhm.
test it, get the results. If you can repeat the results doing the same thing, then you have a yes, you have a thing. So, yeah, I think the scientific approach is something that people would do well to apply, particularly when it comes to stories, funnily enough,
Mhm.
because you get a story about something, and these days people tend to believe it. You hear it, you believe it, right? And if you hear it often enough, it can be
Right,
the most bizarre, ridiculous thing ever. But if people repeat it enough, they believe it. And that is a complete absence of a scientific thinking or critical thinking, even, where you're not looking at the details and saying, well, does that sound right? Does that work? Where did that come from? Who said it and why?
right,
And that makes such a difference. And this is something that we really have to do big time in these days because there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's intentional to direct people down a certain path. And if you allow yourself to be herded, then you're going to get the results of being herded and it's not going to be fun. So asking questions is a really good idea, and really be prepared to be wrong, right? And if you could just underline that, be prepared to be wrong. That is going to be a huge gift because if you always have to be right, then you're limiting what you have access to and you're limiting your growth. If you can honestly say,
yeah,
yeah, you know what, I was way off. That was not correct. It doesn't mean you as a person are wrong or you as a person are bad in any way, shape, or form. We confuse being incorrect in our thoughts with being incorrect as human beings.
right.
And again, it doesn't stand up if you really look at it. So in behavior analysis, when I'm working with kids with autism, the kid isn't bad. The behavior might be. But the behavior is their communication. They're telling you, I have a big problem. And I'm showing you that this is my big problem because I can't verbally articulate it. Right. So perspective is everything. You can have a story, this kid's really bad. They do all these terrible things. But is that true? Is that fair? Chances
Yeah.
are not.
Mm. Yeah, it's, you know, it wasn't where I was going to start going with stories, but this is very important. Like, because the story you're telling yourself is that this kid is trying to do something against you, when that's not the story at all. The actual thing that's happening, the actual event is the kid is trying to express something to you, and they lack the tools to express it in the way that you prefer.
Right. Well, they don't have the necessary filters to
Right.
say that's not a helpful thing to do. They're doing the best they can with what they have, and you might not like it, but labeling that in an easy way, I think this is piece I'm getting to as well, is that it's very lazy to just accept what you hear. And it's very lazy to accept the common belief about a person. So if you're getting told this kid's badly behaved, it's easy to believe it, right? Everybody's saying it. So, yeah, they're bad. And you just shove them in a box and say, there's the bad box, over you go. But wow, what a thing to do to another human being.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, you believed the stories and didn't give them a chance.
Yeah. Like, it's actually not even a fantastic thing to do to adults, but to do it to kids is even worse. Like, the kids don't even have the necessary skill set or the information or the knowledge that you expect them to have, but you're expecting them a lot of times to behave as an adult would in a situation.
Absolutely. And okay, this one just came up, so it's obviously
Right.
something to present.
Right.
In in the DSM, the diagnostic
Mhm.
manual that psychologists use and so on, there is a condition called um, oppositional defiant disorder, right? And it is what I like to term a bullshit diagnosis. It is absolute twaddle because the diagnosis changes when you hit your 18th birthday and it becomes borderline personality disorder. Seriously, right? Like one day you're this, the next day you're
Yeah.
that. Come on. This is written this way for insurance companies. But that aside, the behavior of somebody who's got oppositional defiance disorder is very fighting, kind of aggressive, pushing you away. Um, it's actually a self-defense, right? It doesn't look pretty, but it's a self-defense. Now, I'm going to point something out here, and you can
Right.
see how it lands for you. But think of the language, right? Oppositional
Hmm.
tells you this person is a bad person because they're going to oppose everything that you want
Right.
to do as the adult, right? It's a kid we're talking about. By definition, has to be a kid. So they're oppositional. They're defiant. Ooh, that's
Oh,
bad, right? Again, you're blaming the kid. And
right.
then you call it a disorder. So there is something wrong with this kid that makes them argue and talk back and dispute with you. And so this puts everything onto the child. Now, if you actually look at what's going on with that kid, it is trauma. It is a trauma response. And in my experience of working with kids with this diagnosis, typically the trauma is ongoing and it's in their household quite often. It might be in
Right.
the school, but usually it's in the household. And this one teenager I work with, went to her house a lot while I was working with her. And frankly, if I lived there, I'd have it too. It was a freaking nightmare. This kid was living a nightmare. So yes, she's fighting back and she's pushing people away. She's trying to survive,
Yeah.
but that language puts it all on the kid. So where are we just buying into that and saying this story about this kid, like, yeah, she's oppositional, defiant, and all these labels, they roll off the tongue. Oof. You call somebody that, whatever they do, if they tell you, no, I don't think that's a good idea, oh, you're being oppositional, right? You've already
Hmm.
labeled them. They haven't got a chance.
Yeah.
So the way we use language is so important and it just gets thrown around. It's like, whoa, where did you come up with that from? Let's throw it all onto the kid because God forbid you should ask the adults to stop being so traumatizing,
Right.
right? If you have to talk to another adult and say, hey, look what you're doing to your kid, well, that's risky. They might not like it, but you can put it
Yeah.
onto the kid,
Yeah.
right? So as you can tell, I feel very strongly about this and I get mad as hellfire when I see that diagnosis because I know that child is being shoved in a corner and blamed.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you on that because when I worked at a place where we did family therapy, I did the IT. I wasn't a therapist, but I would read from the library to a point where they would say, like, can you read this book? We just got a new book in. Let me know what you think about it before we bother to work with it. So I would read the books, right? And a lot of diagnosis, including ADHD and stuff like that, I'm like, well, hold on here. There's actually an evolutionary purpose for these things. Like, yes, right now, the environment we live in, it's not conducive to that particular personality type, is where I start to kind of look at it as a personality type rather than something that's diagnosable. But if you put them in an environment where they're actually suited to thrive, it's like that's amazing. These are all the skill sets you need here.
Yeah, I mean, in her case, in this particular kiddo's case, whose house I said, if I lived there, I'd have that problem. She was the youngest of five siblings.
Mhm.
She was the only one with that particular father. The other four were,
Right.
different parent.
Yeah.
And she was made to feel that every day of her life. She was blamed for things. We would arrive to the house and get greeted with, what the F are you doing here? And that was to the kid, not me.
Hmm.
And it went downhill from there. So that kind of environment,
Yeah.
what behavior do you expect? But the story about it was it's all on her. She's the problem. We have to treat her. We really didn't have to treat her. We needed to treat the parents because they were the problem.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? Like, I remember when I first got kind of turned to this idea. It was even before I was working at that place I just mentioned. I was watching, I think it was the news, and they were talking about this woman who had been on medication for depression. And then they were interviewing her, and she was telling her story. And it's like she had 5 kids. She lost her job. Her husband was in jail. She had to move him back with her mother. And I'm like, no kidding. You're depressed. Like,
Right. And depression. Now, before anybody starts getting on their high horse, I am not talking about imbalances and
right.
clinical depression, but a
Well, yeah,
lot of depression, when you look at it, you don't have a problem. Your life has a
yeah,
problem. Your life is the problem, right? It's exactly what you just described. How are
yeah,
you supposed to feel when that's going on? Right? Like, are you supposed to wake up in the morning and say the sun will come out tomorrow? Like,
right.
no, actually, this is really, really bad and I'm feeling it. And if you don't see a way out of that situation, or you don't have a game plan that you can reasonably expect to work, what else are you supposed to feel? Of course you're depressed. Like, that
Yeah,
would be a normal thing. You don't need medication, you need a different life.
yeah. Well, I mean, like, and I've kind of come to the idea that I can understand why they might have given her medication if she was trying to do something and she wanted to take the edge off. It's not something I would normally recommend unless it's really severe, because you're better off to fix the problem than you are to just, treat the symptoms.
It depends. It can be an interim
Right.
thing, right? If you're feeling like hell and you can't get out of bed,
Hmm.
then something that helps you get out of bed is a good
Right.
thing. If it helps you manage those 5 kids without losing the plot,
Yes.
okay. But at the same time, something needs to be done about what's wrong in
Right.
that life, right? And how can we help get out of that so that then the antidepressants can go away? It's not a long-term solution ever.
Hmm.
It just isn't. And serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, very popular
Mm.
antidepressant, right? But I have a I did some reading on that, and I found that the studies, scientific studies, show that increasing your serotonin makes very little difference. They tested decreasing the serotonin as well to see what that did. Very little difference. So it's like 3% of the
Hmm.
people that take those medications actually get benefit. And typically, it only lasts a few weeks, and then they either have to increase the dose or change the med. So that isn't really the answer. Now, got to put a disclaimer out there and say, I am not
Well, yeah.
RFK Jr. I am not RFK Jr. and I am not saying that you can't take these meds, but what I am saying is don't rely on them. You
All
got to
right.
take action.
Use them for what they're for, and use them for
Use
what within
them.
your limits.
Don't expect them to fix things because that's not what they do.
Well, that was the thing, right? Of that when I was watching the news, because they were kind of the way that the impression it had that story had left me with was that they were saying, "Oh, she has a chemical imbalance," but I'm like, her life is incredibly out of balance. I don't think it's the chemicals in her brain. They're doing the proper
Exactly.
response. They're making her have a strong emotional reaction to her situation to motivate her to get out of it. But there's nothing she can do at the time about it. So yeah, sure, you know. But like it wasn't that there was something wrong with her brain. It was her brain was functioning as it should function in this
Her
situation.
brain was absolutely on point from the sounds of things like, yes, you are correct. This is shitty. This is awful. Everything is falling apart. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be really weird if you were happy about it. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's abnormal. That's somebody I'd be watching very carefully to see what are they going to do next in their manic phase, right? Because that is
Yeah.
not normal behavior. So we pathologize
Hmm.
things that actually have a root cause.
Right.
And we just, again, to keep it with the stories, we kind of go with the story that people tell. This kid is badly behaved. That woman needs medication. She's depressed. It's lazy. It is so freaking lazy to go with that and not actually look at it and say, well, hang on a minute. Hold up, hold up. What is actually happening here? And let's look at the bigger picture. And, when it comes to kids, let's look at the adults. What are they doing? You know, what are they bringing to the party? Because typically the adults make a massive difference. They can help and they can hinder. And that's a big part of when I'm doing behavior analysis. That's a big part of what I'm working on is having the parents get out of their own way and their kids' own way. Because we bring our stories. This is the way I was raised, right? And if I had $1 for every time I've heard a
Mm.
parent say, well, my parents smacked me and look at me, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, if you are advocating hitting a child, you are not, in fact, okay. You did not come out of that all right. And if you think about it, if you've got a small child, they do something you don't like, so you hit them. You are teaching them one, it's okay to hit when you're not happy. Two, you, the person who are in charge of their welfare, in charge of keeping them alive, are going to hurt them. So
Right.
they learn how to be really sneaky because that kid
Yeah.
isn't going to learn not to do the behavior. They're going to learn not to do the behavior in front of you. So they get hella sneaky and then they become bullies at school and they do all these other things. And suddenly you've got a very troubled teenager. Why? Because you taught them they weren't safe.
Hmm.
So, if you're coming now saying, look at me, I'm a fine, upstanding adult and I smack my kid because they need to learn respect. That's a
Yeah.
bullshit. That is not how that works, ever. That does not work. If you want to hit a child, you have a problem.
Yeah. No, it's
And we have
interesting.
those
Like,
stories, right? We have
yeah.
those stories. This is how I was raised. So if you then stop and say that wasn't okay, ooh, that is a big can of worms because now your parents' parenting was not okay. Do you have any idea what a big deal that is? Everybody freaks out. The parents freak out, you freak out, like everybody's losing the plot because something fundamental to how you were raised is now considered incorrect or not something I want to do, right? And boy, I have worked with extended families on this kind of stuff to get everybody into a space where they can accept that you don't have to hit a 2-year-old with autism.
Mm. Yeah.
You would think it wouldn't have to be a deal, but it has to be a deal because everybody has their story about how it's supposed to look and what you're supposed to do. And if you criticize by not wanting to do it too, right, just the simple act of not wanting to repeat it is viewed as criticism because this is such an emotive subject.
Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like I started to notice that for some time that it's the we don't want to go into that situation where we criticize the parents or even the society the way it functions and where it's putting its priorities. It's easier, quicker and easier to label the child as the problem than to do the things that fixes it.
Oh, it's so much easier to blame the kid because they can't defend themselves. Like they haven't got a leg to stand on. And if you tell a child you are a problem, you have this diagnosis, they take that on board and make it part of their identity. So
Hmm.
now they're going to live carrying that label that you put on them because you couldn't handle your own shit. And that's like, as you can tell, I'm a little feisty at the
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah.
I've had a feisty couple of days, but I get like this on this subject because it's so important. As adults, we talk about, oh, I can't do this. I have these limitations. Can anybody help me get rid of my limitations? Yes, it involves looking at the stories that you are still
Hmm.
carrying with you from childhood. It involves all the things that you believe to be true about yourself that somebody else has told you because it was convenient for them, or because maybe they believed it, but only because they didn't look at it properly. Right.
Right.
So we carry all these things and we make them limit us. And it absolutely drives me nuts. But this is what we do. And I mean, I've lived through that too, which is why it kind of drives me nuts because
Yeah.
it's like that was unnecessary. And I can see now, okay, that was really unhelpful. You didn't have to do that, but we do it. And
Yeah.
and then adults are these kids who have grown up now and they've got these labels. I mean, how many kids how many adults can you talk to who will say, "Oh yeah, when I was in school, they always said I was looking out the window too much, and if I focused on my work more, I'd have been a really good student." Okay, you know, the person teaching you probably wasn't very interesting. Maybe they weren't getting your attention. Maybe the subject was boring. Maybe you'd been sitting on your ass for 4 hours and needed to get up and move. Maybe a whole heap of things, right?
Right.
And it's not necessarily a I'm pointing the blame at this person because if that's what the teacher thinks is correct for a classroom, then that's what they're going to do. But blaming the kid is inherently unfair.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
my soapbox.
yeah. What I was going to say is that because I was thinking while you were talking was this isn't like a blame game. This is pointing out the power you actually have as a parent.
Oh yeah.
It may not be your instinct to do a certain thing with your child because you think, oh, it's society says it's wrong, or I've been raised to that that's wrong. But now you're free. You're free.
Mhm.
As I said to my nephew one time, I will now absolve you of the rule that says you have to leave your dirty clothes all over your floor. You are now free to pick it up if you want to. So for parents, you're now free to actually manage your kids in the way you actually think is correct and not versus what you think other people will say to you or stop you from doing.
Yeah. And one of the things I'd like you to ask yourself,
Hmm.
parents who are listening, is what did you want as a kid and not have?
That's
Do that, right?
I
Like
lost you for a
what?
second, Michaela.
Sorry?
I
You
lost
lost
you for
me?
a second, but I don't know if that's me or if it's the.
I don't know.
Well,
My
we'll see when I
internet
review
looks
it.
okay. But yeah, and I'm kind of losing me too, so that's interesting. But yeah,
Go.
kids and getting out of their way
Mhm.
is sometimes one of the best things a parent can do because we want to tell them, okay, this is what you need to do now. This is how it needs to look because society's told you that. But what if that's wrong? And I want to give you a true story right now because this is one of my favorite stories to tell parents that I went through, right? And that is with my eldest son. He was in school in Canada at the time, and his teacher came to me and said, we were about to move country, and she
Mhm.
came to me and said, you know, he really can't speak French. His French is awful. I suggest you just put him in a stream that doesn't involve languages. He can't do languages, right? And I heard this and I thought, wow, that's really harsh. Holy smokes. So I decided not to do anything with it.
Mhm.
I just I had it and I didn't do anything with it. Now, as good fortune would have it, we moved country. And when we moved to Singapore. Okay, very different. And the first thing I was told when he went to school was, oh, he's going to have to learn Mandarin Chinese. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be
Yeah.
interesting. But I still didn't say anything because I wanted to see what he could do.
Right.
And he learned Mandarin so fast, I can't even tell you.
Right.
Reading, writing. He was telling jokes in Mandarin in three
Oh yeah.
months. He was dreaming in Mandarin not
Mm.
too long later. And he now speaks 7 languages, including French. So,
Yeah.
what do we get from that? If I had listened to his teacher and believed her, I would have redirected him away from anything to do with
Right.
languages. Whereas now he has a PhD in linguistics.
Yeah.
So I would have completely altered his life based on this woman who did not know how to teach French. She had learned her French teaching from the internet,
Yeah.
right? So I would have thought she's the teacher, she knows what she's talking about. My kid can't do languages. Here I'm going to make him go this direction, right?
Yeah.
What a disservice. Can I even articulate that, how bad that would have been? Because he loves language,
Yeah.
loves it. He's really good at
Well,
it naturally.
because I've got two anecdotes to go with that. One, I have a nephew who was basically told the same thing, right? Oh, he's having trouble with languages. You should take him out of the French program, put him in like French immersion, or just take him out completely. And then my sister got him tested, and he's like in the 90 something percentile for language comprehension. I kind of looked at my nephew because he was feeling down and going, okay, listen, here's the deal. You got tested, and here's what we found out. Your teacher's not qualified to teach you. That's what we've learned.
And
Your teacher's not as good at
yes,
languages as you are. And she,
because sometimes
yeah.
teachers are going to teach a subject in one way,
Hmm.
maybe two if you're lucky, but there are at least four different learning styles, and people have a combination of these. So if you're teaching somebody who's visual and you only give them audible stuff, right, they're not going to get it as well.
Right.
And if you have a teacher who takes an awfully long time to teach you the months of the year or something like that, boredom is going to kick in. But this particular teacher, believe it or not, I discovered sometime later, she didn't like boys. And
Ah,
she had said the same thing about every boy in her class. Now that's criminal,
yeah,
in my opinion, because the parents who took that on board and said, oh boy, my kid's no good at languages, will have really harmed their kids by stopping them from trying. So that is an example of where we believe a story without really looking at it. And I'm so glad I got out of his way and let him try. Because
yeah,
if I had directed him, he would not be having anywhere near the fulfillment that he has. That
right.
was all on him, and I got out of his way. That was my parenting win, was not being a barrier.
Yeah. It's funny. That actually kind of takes away for me having to actually share the second point because the teacher was literally trying to get boys out of her class. My second point was going to be even for myself, and I don't know if I shared this on the podcast, but I've shared it recently with people because I was trying to explain to people like learning styles are kind of, and I don't mean the official learning styles. I mean like specifically how mine worked was that so the word in English, right? The
Mm,
word eight, as in the past term of eat, past tense of eat, and the number eight. ATE was simple. I knew it. I had it. I knew when it was applied. No big deal. But spelling EIGHT didn't sit with me yet. So every time I had the opportunity to write the word, whether it was the number or the past tense of the verb, I would write the number because I wanted to make sure I had in my head EIGHT because that's what I was having a problem with. But my teachers never picked up on that that's what I was doing. So they would mark it wrong. And then that would just be the end of it. And they never looked onto why does he consistently use that no matter what the thing is, you know? Like no one thought because I was like, well, the point is I have to learn how to write this, so I'm going to make sure I repeat it every opportunity I get. And I mean, I was a
right,
kid. I wasn't going to like sit there at home at night and practice. I had other things to do as a kid. I did it in
right.
school stuff. But just to say, right,
But
like I was going to offer, maybe your son was just processing it in a way so they had a better understanding it, and that just made it frustrated because he wasn't doing it her way. But no, she just wanted to,
she
get
was
rid of
just
the
getting
boys. But
boys
that's
out of the
different.
class. But I mean, can you
Yeah,
imagine what are you even thinking to tell a parent this about your kid just because you don't like their gender? It's like, what?
yeah,
That is the most utterly bizarre thing. But just look at what I could have done
mhm.
if I'd taken
Oh
that
yeah,
on board, right?
yeah.
So the stories that we hear, particularly from teachers, parents, the people in your immediate environment, those will affect how you grow as a human being, and they affect your self-confidence, your self-efficacy. Like, do you feel like you can't handle anything because you were always told you couldn't? Do you feel incapable of things? Do you have a story about, oh, I can't write, I can't write letters, I'm terrible at that, or I can't do math? Is that true? Or is it just that somebody told it to you and you believe it?
Right.
So, stories, I don't know that this was where we were going to go with it, but it's what
Oh,
came up is you got to be careful with these stories. What are you wearing? What are you carrying with you that doesn't actually fit?
but it still applies. The stories you're told, the stories you take in, you allow yourself to absorb, still count. Yeah, I was gonna like, well, and we still will touch on it, but I was going to go kind of like when you're looking at spiritual stuff, the stories you get versus taking them literally, and using them for your practice because it's describing how something is by giving you a story. but I also had the intention of also the things that you believe, the narrations you're telling yourself or the narratives. So we're just covering that part first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, stories, look at mythologies,
Hmm.
right? Whether you're looking at the myth of Lilith or you're looking at the biblical myths,
Hmm.
right? They're all myths. They are stories that have a point, they have a
Right,
purpose, and they're directing you somewhere.
right.
So when you listen to these stories, again with the Buddhism, but the Buddha is refuted to have said that when you hear something, pay attention to it and measure it against what you know to be true.
Hmm.
And if you find it to be good, take it and use it. And if you don't find it to be good, put it to one side. This is a key piece that we're not doing with stories now. But stories are our primary way of communicating with each other and getting concepts across. It's so important, and myths are amazing for that.
Well, we're
They
a
really get,
storytelling species.
yeah, storytelling is I mean, it's what we used to do, right? Back in the day. The campfires and what have you is oral traditions. Things were passed from one generation to the next, verbally in the way of stories.
Yeah,
Not, okay, listen to me, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. Mm-mm-mm. No, stories get the message across much better because you can relate to it.
right. And they get that visceral connection, so they bring all your systems into play when you're learning. Because I mean, look at kids playing, right? They're learning. That's what they're doing. But they're learning on their level and they're learning with their priorities. So they're telling themselves stories and they're acting out their stories, and that's teaching them how to learn the things they're doing.
And
Or,
that is actually that brings the point, the opportunity to bring the point in that when kids spend all their time on internet,
mhm,
do on screens, they are missing a very, very important part of their growth because you don't have room for imagination when you're using a screen. It's all set up, right? Even if you're playing a game and you have choices, you can go here, you can go there. Somebody else set that up. You didn't come up with it. You don't have the imagination, you have the response to somebody else's
right.
imagination. This is inherently bad for children to be doing this because they are not experimenting. They're not testing to see what happens when I do this. And, okay, you don't want them to stick a fork in the electric socket, granted, but there's a lot of other things they could be doing. And they're not outside playing. They're not getting into their environment. They're not learning about it. They're just looking at screens. And that is a big problem in the development of the brain and the development of the range that that person has to draw from. So, if your screen breaks or if your internet's down, I'm bored, I've got nothing to do. And they lose the plot. Why? Because they have no imagination, no idea what to do if that screen goes away. Now, that is an
Mm,
addiction,
yeah.
and it's a harmful addiction because it
Yeah.
stunts your growth, essentially.
Well, and I was just watching something on screen time and that lately. And yeah, like I'm looking at it like, yeah, well, this is an addiction, and you're having children who have no idea how to handle addiction. And then they're going through withdrawals whenever they don't have their screens. And it's like, this is a tiny human being who's basically mirroring when you're seeing adults with addictions behaving like.
Well, their brains are wired now
Yeah.
by the screens. Like your synapses, the neural pathways are wired based on your experiences and based on what you're doing. So if you're always on the internet with that rapid kind of impulse thing coming from the internet, it wires your brain differently. They've done studies on this and hooked people's heads up to screens and stuff, and you can see the difference. There is a massive difference. And how you think about things, or how you don't think about things, varies tremendously based on how much of your development was spent in front of a screen. And
Mm,
it's really problematic. Impulse control, what would that be for somebody who grew up on a screen? They don't have impulse control. What's the point? I don't need impulse control. Do it now. This thing is now. And seconds, you have seconds to get to somebody. If you want to get someone's attention, you got like 5 seconds. Well, good grief. That was not, I remember when that was not the case.
Mm.
Maybe I'm ancient, but I remember when that was not how it was.
Yeah.
And it's problematic when you've got 3 seconds or 5 seconds to get somebody's attention.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Every new technology brings its new almost to say it's a new burden to us as a species because we now have to learn how to regulate the use of it, how to adapt, how to us to adapt to it versus how we actually are. Because like, yeah, you can get addiction. It's too easy. It becomes too easy to do. So then you don't want to push yourself to do the difficult things. I mean, we have certain rewards for doing difficult things, but only if we succeed, usually.
And honestly, the reward isn't as instant or as
No.
bright and shiny as playing a game on the internet, for example.
Right.
That is, and I find kids with autism will particularly get so hooked into this because it speaks to how their brain is already wired. And then, you can just dive into these games and they're gone. They're solid gone. And trying
Mm.
to pull a kid out of there is very, very difficult. And you are likely to have computer wrapped around your head if you try. There's going to be some big behaviors because they can't tell you how aversive that is, how painful that is for you to stop them from doing their
Right.
screen time. I've got a kid right now that I'm going to be working with who is all day on the iPad and doesn't go to sleep till 2 in the morning. And the parents are like, "Can you help me get him off the iPad?" I have no idea, but I'll give it a shot. Because it's such a big thing. This is a massive task, and it's not easy. And everybody's going to have to be on board with it. And there's going to be some very big behaviors coming from this
Yeah.
because that is that person's mode of interacting with the world. And when you
Yeah.
take it off them, they don't know how to interact with the world now. It's like taking you off your chair and saying, "Okay, I'm going to plonk you here on Mars, and now you got a bunch of Martians to talk to." You'd be
Yeah.
like, "I don't know. What are they saying? I have no idea what these people want." And you wouldn't understand when they tell it to you because they're speaking Martian, right? It's the same
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's like, I have no connection with you. Can you talk to me online, please? Or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
that addiction, particularly when they start so young, that's the way you interact with the world. So how far from spirituality is that?
Yeah.
Hell and gone. Like that is woof, right in the other direction.
Yeah. It's actually funny because so right, as you imagine, right? So my younger relatives, right? They're like, "Oh, you should text more," and I'm like, "I hate texting because texting for me is just a quick and easy way to get information out. I'm going to be at your place in 5 minutes, just let so you don't have to do a phone conversation." Or, but to sit there, like, and I always tell people, if you're going to write like 2 or 3 paragraphs, call me.
Mhm.
Or better yet, we'll meet up or something. I haven't seen you in a while. You're giving me 10 paragraphs. Let's just go hang out. Because
Right.
that's how I like to do my things. But it's weird, right? When I play video games, because this used to bug my nephews, and I was playing like, like a World War II flight simulation there, so you're fighting and that. And I always tell them is like I can't play these because the way I taught myself to use my senses is I'm the core, I'm the center. So everything is related to how I feel things. The screen is away from me, the action is away from me. So I have a hard time visualizing that space because I've cued all my senses to pay attention to where I am physically in relation to myself. So tying it in also to the gravity I'm feeling, the pressure of where I'm sitting. So when I'm trying to play a game like that, I have a hard time because I don't have access to all my sensory input. And I've trained
Right.
myself to have access to all my sensory input in a
Which
quick
is
way.
where things like virtual reality goggles and stuff come in. And there's, I mean, we're using internet right now,
Yeah.
right? Because we're in two different countries. So we're
Mhm.
talking to each other with a screen and so on. So is that hypocrisy? No, because we don't rely on this
Because
as
it's a
the
tool.
only way
Yeah,
to interact.
that's right.
So technology, just like when calculators first came
Mhm.
in and people freaked that nobody'd ever be able to do math again, there is some truth in the pressure to learn how to do math long-handed, if you
Mhm.
will, is no longer there.
Right.
but it's also not the most important thing in the world, right? Like we can kind of balance that out. But when you're talking about your person-to-person interactions and your interaction with your environment, how you understand your world to be, if all of that is on a screen, that's too much. That is problematic because who is controlling what you see? There's a lot of bots. There's a lot
Mm.
of social media influencers who, frankly, talk the biggest load of twaddle that, I've one or two that I've come across. I'm just looking at them and wondering, how do you walk and talk at the same time? Because, the level of stupid is epic. And and but if that's what you're learning from and you believe the stories they tell because you're not looking at them, then how do you expect that person to function in society, right? What are they going to
Right.
do with that? And look at Gen Z, Gen Alpha, look at these generations now. They're having a big problem interacting with the world. And a lot of that is screens. A bunch of that is because the planet really is messed up right now. But put those two things together, and you have two generations of what planet am I on and why? And why do you all think that these things matter to us when they don't?
Right.
Right? That what matters no longer is the same. It's really shifted. And a lot of that is screen time. It's not only because the world's on fire, it's also how people relate to it.
Well, yeah, the world's on fire and you have no experience on how to fix or interact with it to fix it.
Right. And I mean, typically every generation says, okay, you, next generation, fix all the things that we screwed up.
Yeah.
You don't give them any tools, you don't give a how-to manual, but you sort of give the burden of, well, we screwed up. Can you fix it? And we're still doing that, but there's even less tools. There's nothing now. There's no connection. There's Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they have no um connection to why they would want to fix anything.
Mm.
What's in it for them? And how are they going to do that anyway? They have no tools, they have no money, they have no access to anything. Nobody's sort of hooked into anything, you know what I mean? Other than the internet, nothing else matters. You can be in your parents' basement and,
Yeah.
come out once a month and spend the rest of your time on the computer. And that's as fulfilling as anything's going to be because that's what you're used to,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So, as a species, we've changed so dramatically. And I think that is a huge part of what's happening. Sorry, my computer's having a little thing. Funnily enough, my computer's objecting to what I'm saying. Uh, it's so funny. It just said, your USB device is not recognized. Well, it was fine 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we're changing as a species
Oh,
and we're getting further away from things that are spiritual, or at least the people who are plugged into computers are. And I think it's going to become more polarized in that way as well. You're going to have some people who are sort of looking for a cabin in the woods and getting into a whole heap of spirituality, and you're going to have others who don't know what the word means.
right. Yeah, I'm glad we start off this way because we do have to remind people of stories from the perspective of the stories they tell themselves. And the
Mhm.
reason I'm making that statement is because there's an anxious dragon who wants to get his story out. So, for the listeners who are probably sitting there, well, what the hell spell did you do this week?
Mhm.
I thought I'd share this one. So, yeah, I'm literally getting nudged. So this week I piggybacked on what Michaela did. So Michaela woke the dragon, said dragon here who's nudging me. And then what I did with Hecate, because it was interesting. Okay. So I'll just do the setup before I get into it. So I started off, I had a few days where energy was coming through my third eye chakra and then it went filtered through my heart chakra and then it went into the necklace I'm wearing. So I was preparing energy ahead of time. I'm not sure why it had to go from the ajna to the heart chakra, which I forget the name of, but it had to do that to be the necessary energy. So that was then used. So when I had came to the day of casting the spell, Hecate just basically went, let's just let me use your body. This is how we're going to do the spell today. And so I'm like, all right, fine, do what you need to do. And so we kind of did a combination ritual, not quite a dance, but some words, some actions, and releasing the energy from the necklace I'm wearing. And then we basically made it a layer of reality, a new layer, or a layer of reality accessible to the dragon that Michaela woke up. Now, for those of you who aren't casting spells or aren't casting spells yet on a level where you're fully aware of what's going on when you're doing it, it was a very interesting sight to see. Once the layer was opened up, it was like to use the term, it was like the dragon had the zoomies. He was moving through the layer, like running around, checking it out, seeing what could be done, how it benefited, what was the use of it. And so basically, yeah. So basically, the spell was about now giving the dragon a better range or giving it easier access to getting its golden breath to where it needed to go. And this layer of reality had basically the its construction was in a way that was conducive to that. So that was the spell I cast. And that's not like, I don't know. Short of being there, you don't get the full visual. And I don't know how it feels for everyone else when they cast spells. Like first time I've ever cast spells, it was like, okay, I did the thing, and then, well, whatever happens. I had no idea about the flow of how the energy would flow from the spell or what effect it would have. But now when I cast them, it's like I know where the energy is going. I see the changes happening, or in the very least, I feel them happening. Like I have a full immersion of what's going on, the consequences, the feelings, all that kind of stuff. So I'd actually be interested if anyone who does cast spells, who is doing this, write us in, tell us how it is for you. Because actually be interested because I don't have any other perspective but my own, right, on this. So that's that part. Dragon is now satisfied that I described the spell. And okay, now Hecate's there too. So now it's also moving on to the next part. And that's stories as metaphors in mystical practices.
Mhm.
And I think it's more like, so this gets a little bit on the nuance side, because we had already discussed, right? The spirit that shows up to you and gives you a name that you can share with other people, that's not their name. That's the name that you
Mhm.
can use. And often they show up as a metaphor for you, you know.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So someone could actually literally show up as a relative of yours, or to use a phenomena that had occurred, at least in the last decade, Slender Man. Now,
Oh,
Slender
yes.
Man didn't exist until someone made him up,
Mhm.
but there was so much of people got so invested in the idea of Slender Man that now Slender Man is a metaphor for spirits to use in their communication with people. So people would now accept Slender Man showing up because it's in the psyche. And that's kind of what part of what we're getting at with when I was told what the topic of this episode would be. That's part of what they wanted to talk about. But the first part we did, that was going to be part of it as well. We just jumped into it right away.
Well, the first part also is illustrative of how powerful stories
Yeah,
are and how they literally become you.
right,
So, like Slender Man became a thing, an entity, because people believed it. You become the way you are because you believe that. And I do a lot of work with people on identity
right,
because often people have an identity that they don't actually like and they
right,
kind of were given it. Now you might think, wait a minute, what? You are who you are and that's it. But that's not true. So, for example, if you said, well, I'm a runner, I love running,
right,
I'm a runner, and that's how you identify, then whether it's raining, snowing, or sunshine, you are going to put your shoes on and go for a run because that's how you identify it's what you do. So
Mhm.
if you say, I have no self control when I go shopping, I'm going to spend all my money and be broke the rest of my life, that's exactly what you will do. That's how you show up. So those are sort of very materialistic examples. But
Right.
if you think of yourself as a negative person, yep. And if you think of yourself as a positive person, yep. And that's not to say that you're always going to be either of those,
Right.
but you will predominantly be the thing that you identify with, right? And these things come from stories.
Hmm.
Those stories become who you are, those limitations. I've seen parents say, "This is my kid, he has autism."
Right.
And so the kid will then introduce himself to other people. My name's George, I have autism. And it's like, why would you do that? Do you show up and say, "Hey, my name's Jane and I have dental cavities"? I mean,
Right.
it's a stupid ass thing to do, but we do it. And that kid becomes that label. They live to that label. So when you are visualizing entities, when
Hmm.
you're talking about them, when you are telling a story about that entity and weaving something around about them, be very aware that you're creating an entity, you're creating something, just like Slender Man was created. I think it's a brilliant example. And your words have power. That's why they're called spells. A prayer is a spell. It's the same thing. We just slap a different title on it. Your words, your incantations are powerful. If you walk down the street and say, "You are such a jerk. What an asshole. Oh my
Hmm.
God, you're ugly." And you say these kind of things to people, how do you think the rest of their day is going to go? Even if they don't know you. So they don't
Right.
know if they want to give any credence to that. But somebody said something nasty. Now, if you go walking down the same street and you say, "Hey, I love that shirt. Whoa, you are looking so happy today. Here, have a rose," or whatever it is, right? That will affect how that person's day goes. You have shifted their energy just with those words. Isn't that wild? I mean, that is powerful. So when you're casting a spell with intention and motivation, you bet your tush you're creating something. Yup. Got to be
Yeah.
very careful about that.
Yeah. And from there, I want to go with the idea of so a story is not specifically itself a lie, right? Especially in this case. It's not that it's a lie, it's you're putting ideas out there to help people learn something or to see a situation. So you may be using fictional things, but it's not a deception. It's still using fictional things, but to give you a practical understanding of something. So in your magical practices, you may be calling upon, well, we'll keep it Slenderman for now because people have done that. So the spirit that shows up with the metaphor of Slenderman for you is not specifically lying to you because it's reacting to your desires for that metaphor. It's telling you a
It's an
story that
interaction.
you need to hear.
Yeah, it's an interaction that you have set in motion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Stories don't have to be factual. Okay, I'm going to throw this one out there. Stories don't have to be factual in order to be true, right? You don't have to have specific details that were exactly happening in the physical plane in a tangible way that you can see and take photos of, right? That isn't necessary in order for a story to be true. So, truth is your perspective on what is real, if you will. Um, Perspectives are different for everybody. So, your truth and my truth may be very different. And who's to say one of them's wrong, right? So, same thing applies to stories. For some reason, we tend to get very black and white about, well, that's not a fact, therefore it's wrong. Well, seriously, nobody lives their life that way. We kind of expect it somehow, but it's not what we do. Again,
Right.
that is in fact a fiction,
Hmm.
right? That's not how we live.
Or it's not a fact, therefore we can ignore it and take no value from it.
Right. But I mean, for all the people who have ever read or had read to them the Bible,
Hmm.
do you want to just tell me that again? Because, there are fundamentalists who believe every word that's written in there, even though they know that that has been translated a gazillion times
Right.
from several languages, etc. But no, nope, nope, those words have to be factual. So, yeah, but they're stories, they're parables, because that's how people learn.
Right.
So, was it a lie? No, it's just a means of communication to get the concept that is the truth to you.
Yeah. And by the way, it's Hecate pushing this one. That's why we're having like the dragon wanted to. It's the story of the spell being told, but Hecate has actually been the one telling me about this is what we should really be talking about right now is the metaphors being used, and in terms of spiritual connections. Like when I shared the story in, I don't know if it was episode four, yeah, episode four of the first season, I shared about the Polynesian goddess, sky goddess, right? And I was saying that your interaction can affect how they show up to you, hence the metaphor is chosen and stuff like that. Like, the more I was scared of flying, the more it was affecting her appearance. And she chastised me for going, listen, you're turning me into a monster, when I'm just here sitting with you chilling, you know. So it was like, so my interaction is having an effect. So in fact, a spirit could show up to you, but what you're looking for forces their interaction with you a certain way. They have to then use that metaphor to communicate with you.
Right. Beautifully put. Yeah. And what you're expecting is often what you'll see. If you want to go scientifically, that's your reticular activating system at work, which is a part of your brain that gives you more of what you focus on. So if you buy a red car, suddenly the world and his dog is driving a red car. Like, have you noticed how many Teslas there are? Did you notice them before? Because I didn't. But suddenly, Cybertrucks are everywhere, and dear God, they are ugly. But, you know, that your focus went there. Suddenly Teslas are in the news, so everybody's focusing on them. I had no idea how many dealerships there were or anything, but that's your focus, right? So when you have a focus on how you expect an interaction to go, particularly with an entity, then you will get that reflected back to you. So if you tap into a certain aspect of that entity that is negative, that will be your experience. Entities like human beings are like diamonds. There's many, many facets, not just one. So they are holistic. Hecate is an excellent example. Lilith, beautiful example of all the things, capable of great compassion and great destruction. And they're all necessary. What are you tapping into? What are you working with? What are you visualizing and creating? Right? And demons. Let's talk about demons for a minute. Lots of people have this idea of, oh, I'm wrestling with my demons, I'm fighting my demons, and typically that's going to be somebody who's addicted to substance abuse, for
Right.
example. They're wrestling with their demons. Really? Okay, that might be your truth, that might be your reality, but I don't see demons that way. To me, demons are feisty
Mm-hmm.
and you make friends with them just like dragons. You don't fight with them. Quit fighting with
Yeah.
everything. They bring something to you that is vibrant. It's
Right.
something you can work with. So how do you visualize a demon? What do you attribute to that demon? What do you think they do? Because they're capable of much more than you think they are.
Right.
So what are you tapping into? If you only look for the dark side of Lilith, that's exactly what you'll get. Same with Hecate. If you're looking for some blood magic and so on,
Mm.
okay, that's going to be your experience. But I don't know, it wouldn't be my choice, but that
Yeah.
will be your truth.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And when you look around the world in different mythologies, right, you have a lot of times a similar figure from mythology to mythology. Now,
Mhm.
some of it could be like some of it is going to come from people travel and then they start sharing each other's stories, and so you'll end up having one of the we'll say characters in your mythology evolve to incorporate this new idea, or you might come up with a new one and bring it into your own society and your own system. So you may end up having a new god that shows up in your system of deities that's actually the reflection of a god from another country. But I mean, but there's also like we're looking at also entities that some are larger than planets, and so country to country is not a big deal. For us, it's a big deal, country to country, but for them, it's like, okay, well, you're on this little marble. Okay, whether I show up on this side of the marble or that side of the marble, it's not an inconvenience to me. So you could be picking up the same entity, but giving them a different metaphor or a different name.
And a
So,
lot will depend on what you expect culturally.
right. So, Thor I can't remember the name of Thor I got, but I'm trying to remember. I was going to compare it to the Japanese god of thunder, but I can't remember his name. But you can go from like different societies and have similar entities with similar qualities. You might have a thunder god who's also a god of heroes and a hero to humanity, even though your world's apart, because those
Mhm.
entities you'll kind of get their nature, but depending on what culture you're in, that's their name, or that's what you've learned them in your culture to call them, or it could even be the name they've given you to work with.
And how they show up can be what you expect culturally to be working with, right? That's the aspect. If you look at very, very Christian societies, for example, they have a very particular way of interacting with the entities that they
Right.
consider to be valid. And there's a lot of restriction around those interactions, but there's still interactions.
Right.
There's still a thing, and there's still a visualization, right? There's still an image of how this entity looks. Ask
Hmm.
anybody what Jesus looks like. You're going to get this image. This image was created. It's not a fact per se. It's something that artists drew centuries ago, millennia ago, and more or less has come down that way, right?
Right.
Changed a little bit here, there, but everybody knows what that's going to look like because that is in the collective consciousness. That is what you see on religious walls and this kind of thing, right? So, and what does the devil look like? Are we going to go with horns and a pointy tail? Interesting. That was just Dante's Inferno. It didn't come from anywhere else. But, okay, if you want to play with that one, that's going to be your experience. Lucifer, is Lucifer the brightest angel? Is Lucifer the light bringer? Or did you confuse Lucifer with the devil? Right? They're not the same. Do you know that? So many people don't. So it
Well,
depends
actually,
on your
yeah,
culture.
Lucifer is one of the ones that actually I kind of thought about when I said you adopt a character from another mythology and bring him into your own. Because Lucifer, I think, I can't remember his actual mythology of origin, but got pulled in and eventually became the devil. But Lucifer wasn't the devil. That wasn't what he was originally, to my understanding. Lucifer came from
Correct.
somewhere else.
Correct. And for many people, Lucifer still isn't the devil. But for some, that's how that story has morphed.
Mhm.
Again, is it fact? Is it
Right. Well,
fiction?
like we discussed, right? The serpent in the Garden of Eden. A lot of people use
Uh-huh.
it the devil, but it's like, no, this is the story of why serpents crawl don't have limbs. Also,
And there's so many stories about what that serpent represents.
right?
There are some stories that say that that was Lilith coming
Mm.
back to tempt Eve because Eve was her replacement, right? When Lilith left the Garden of Eden, she was not kicked
Mm.
out, is my understanding. But when she left the Garden of Eden, Adam threw a hissy fit and said, well, I have to have somebody. And so Eve was given to him. And Lilith's like, whoa, really? I was that easily replaced? Here, let me come and talk to you about that. And so,
Actually,
that's a
yeah,
story.
even so, I guess we'll go further in the story of Garden of Eden because I was actually there was a time where I used to watch lectures on TV all the time. I was bored, I'd watch lectures, and there was one given by a Catholic priest, and he says the way we talk about the Garden of Eden is messed up. He says, look at it this way: think about, you have God the Father. So think about God actually as a father. He told his kids not to do something, and the kids did something that made it made such a change in the dynamic of the relationship. It's not that they were booted out; it was just people needed time. Like it was like I can't interact anymore. The change that was made was so substantive that it changed the relationship, and it couldn't go on like it was. And so it was kind of like Adam and Eve actually left because they couldn't live there anymore because now they understood things and they couldn't live in that world anymore.
Okay. And there's another version
Yeah.
where the Garden of Eden was
Mhm.
not actually on this planet anyway.
Right.
It was in the spiritual realm. And when those beings left the spiritual realm, they came to this one. Hence the origin of people, right? That's another story. And these reactions that the listeners possibly having to these stories, whether they're like, "Oh, that's ridiculous," or "Hey, that's blasphemy," or whatever
Mhm.
the reaction is, that's brilliant. Put a pin in that. Make a note that that sparks something in you, and
Yes.
explore that. What does that mean? Where did you get your response from to that? Because I'm
You
just
know,
using
yeah.
words, right? I'm just throwing out some stories here. I'm not telling you that this is true and that's wrong. I'm just saying these are some stories that I've heard,
And you know,
right?
it I, one of the most freeing things I've ever found is when I've heard something, it upset me so much that I got pissed off about it, and I did put a pin in it, and then I explored it, and I was like, oh my God, this is why I held on to this so much. But now that I've let it go, now that I made efforts to let that go and see, well, okay, what is beyond this idea? And the things I've
That's the
learned.
question.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Put a pin in that one as well. We're going to have a lot of pins today because what is beyond this? Yes, that's the point.
Yeah, because you're holding on to that. Because normally, when you hold on to an idea so hard, so strongly that you get angry when it's challenged, is because you're afraid to move on. This is your protection. This is the thing that gives you your security. And
Yeah.
here's someone else coming and challenging your security. But it's like, well, what are they doing that they can challenge the security in the first place? What's holding them together? What's their comfort? What's their center? You know, what's out there that they're not worried about it?
Right. In fact, you remind me of a house guest that I had when I was living in Singapore. And
Right.
this guy is a pastor in one of those churches that speaks in tongues and stuff.
Hmm.
I know some very different people.
Right.
Um, anyway, he was a house guest for a while. And my youngest son wanted to watch this, at the time, new documentary all about the Gospel of Thomas.
Hmm.
And this guy just about lost the plot. Like, literally, he's yelling at me. This is blasphemy. You can't have this on the television. How can you let your child? I'm going to have to pray over you all. Like, he was losing his mind and so angry and so upset. And he fled the house. Like he took
Oh
off
yeah.
because I think he thought he was gonna, I don't know, get struck by lightning or attacked by a demon or something. I'm not entirely sure what he thought was gonna happen, but he was angry, he was scared, he had all these reactions because my kid, who was about 12, wanted to watch a documentary on the Gospel of Thomas, right? Like
Hmm.
that reaction was a bit big for what was going on. And he had no idea what this story was going to reveal
Right.
or implicate. And I mean, these kind of documentaries are famous for being inconclusive. They
Right.
they don't give you a final like, and there it is, there's your answer. They never do that. They spin you out for like 50 minutes, and then in the last 10 minutes they tell you they don't really know. That's how those things work. But this guy was losing his mind over it because he was so strongly attached to this religious thing that he'd got that anything that even vaguely challenged it was absolutely deeply bone deep offensive to him. And I think he was afraid of finding out that maybe he wasn't right. Maybe there was something else. Maybe he could be right and there was something else. But he couldn't handle anything outside of his own circle. It's kind of interesting how he ended up staying at my place for a bit. But anyway, because
Well, it is
that is
interesting sometimes to see how people get together. it makes me think of, I don't know if they still have the show, Wife Swap, where
I
they
have no
would,
idea.
so basically, yeah, the wife from one family would go to live with another family and vice versa. And they would see how each other's lives are. And one episode I had watched, the one woman was like born again, born again Christian. And the other woman was like, essentially, she was an eclectic witch. Well, as you might
But
imagine, right? The swap.
oh boy.
But it made me like it did kind of confused me to just how people don't know even their own religion. Like I grew up understanding that three wise men used astrology to get to where they were going. Like I grew
Yes.
up, like I went to a Catholic school. It was my
Stars.
understanding
Followed the
they,
star.
yeah, yeah, it was my understanding they used astrology to get to figure it out. Well, but not just seeing the star, but actually reading the signs to know to follow the star in the first place. This was my
Uh-huh.
understanding, even as a little kid, that that's what happened. But when this lady came in and she
Yeah.
saw the zodiac sign, like she had a mat, the zodiac sign mat, the wheel and everything like that, and all the stars, and she lost it. And I'm like, well, how do you think the three wise men found Jesus? You didn't even know to look for Jesus in the first place. And I've heard, like, since then, I've heard people explain it, well, they had a vision, God told them whatever. And I'm like, well, I grew up and that's not what I learned in church. Like,
But here's the thing.
yeah,
Just think about that for a moment. So you can't have these astrology signs, right? Which have been around for an awfully long time, but it's okay to have a vision.
yeah,
Well, is it though? If in that religion, is that okay to have? I thought that was like the devil talking to you if you had visions. Didn't
yeah,
Joan of Arc get burned for that?
yeah,
So, it's there's a lot of hypocrisy going on, and I think it is, as you said, they don't know their own religion. A lot of people don't. They're not paying attention.
right,
And so you get these direct contradictions, right? Like you can't have astrology, but it's okay to have visions. Except in our history, various people have been burned for their visions.
yeah,
And wouldn't you label that as witchcraft? And isn't that the burnable offense? Etc. Right? So it's kind of okay, but you don't like the symbols. Catholicism has a lot of symbols in it. What is the symbol for a born again Christian? It's like a P with a cross, right? Or a fish. There's that as
well,
well. I've
so
seen both.
the fish was the original symbol for Christianity,
Right, because a fisherman, right?
right? So when you saw a building marked with it or something, you knew you can go in there and do your prayers and stuff like that. The P, that one, I'm not sure because like the church I went to, we had that symbol, but we weren't born again. We
Okay.
were just like,
But
but
it's a
yeah,
Christian thing, right?
yeah,
Like I see it here and there. So is that not a symbol?
yeah. The altar
It,
has
it
symbols on it.
represents something.
Yeah,
It represents something. So my symbol of Gemini represents something, represents time of year I was born.
yeah.
And various other things like people who can read astrology or work with astrology, or even you're doing human design, astrology is in there.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's but we have these stories about it, right? You can't look at that belongs to the devil, but this is okay because it was in the Bible, or however you want to look at that. But the Bible as a mythology, it's an awfully bloody one. There are millions and millions and millions and billions of people getting murdered in that. They're getting killed. Lucifer killed three people who deserved it, right? They'd done really, really bad things and they kind of worked their way for that. That was Lucifer was three people. And then the God of the Bible wiped out millions of people because they worshipped the wrong thing or they said the wrong thing or they didn't pay attention to something. Very tiny crimes, really, for a very, very big response. So, what is that story telling you? Because I don't think it's meant to be taken literally. At least I
No.
would hope not, because you can't say this is the God of mercy and have those stories be true.
Although I will, and use this term ironically, play devil's advocate. I
Go
will
for it.
sometimes tell people who, when we have this discussion, God gets like, oh, I love you, and then someone disagrees, and then all of a sudden, it's not like it turns like that. Like the stories usually have like a bit of a development before, like if you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's not until the people actually try to have sex with the angels, that okay, that's it. You've gone far enough now. Like, you know. But you're right though. But like for the response, you're right. It's not proportionate to the crime.
Mhm.
Wiping out everyone because some people did something is not, or worse, wiping out animals and plant species and stuff like that with the flood because human beings did something.
Right.
Like that's not a
I mean,
proportionate. But it also tells you that it's a story because you're trying to explain people how to behave and here's a potential consequence. But what about all the other creatures who did nothing wrong? But then you have to start dehumanizing the creatures, or you have to start playing down the value of other creatures to make your story work.
well, I think the other thing is you got to remember how old those stories are, even
Right.
though they've been rewritten and fiddled with, the basics of them are really, really old. So, where was people's development at that
Hmm.
time? Their understanding of their world was really
Right.
small because they only had their village or their tribe or their whatever, small group. They didn't know about the rest of the planet. People in Africa had no idea China existed, etc., etc. How long ago were countries discovered? How long ago was America, quote unquote, discovered? People were already living here, but there's our understanding has developed dramatically in relatively recent
Right.
times. So back in the day when the Bible was being written, this was for a very simple group of people who, if you want to get a message across, make it boom and like okay bad go boom, got it. And now, all right, so we need to behave this way. And a lot of the biblical stories have been skewed in such a way that the church has control over the people, right? You have to behave this way or else. And fire and brimstone, etc., etc.
Mhm.
Okay, where did that come
Dante,
from?
which is also Dante's Inferno.
Exactly. But it's handy. You
Hmm.
can scare the living daylights out of people with that, particularly if you start them young enough. You
Right.
really terrify them into all kinds of behavior that you control. So that's the power of a story. And somebody created that story, and
Yeah.
other people bought into it and added to the creation of that story. And now look at the power it has. People have had wars over this. They will again. And
Mhm.
people have married and not married because of it. And
Yes.
they've done all kinds of things based on religion. You're Catholic, you can't marry a Protestant. You're this, you can't marry that.
Mhm.
You guys have to fight, not marry, because you believe differently the same thing. It's not even that different, honestly. But, okay, I go through that door, you go through that door, we're ending up in the same place. But we have to fight because we don't do it the same way. All of this
Yeah.
is control of the church, and the stories are manipulated to that end. Again, power of the words.
Yeah.
So spells hold power.
Mhm. Right. So now you know the value of stories. You like end the stories in your spiritual practice. Right? Part of the idea is to make sure that people don't think they're being deceived just because the entity they're talking to comes across as a different version than what they're told in a practice. Or like someone is told Lilith is supposed to be a certain way, and when they're doing their thing, and if they happen to get a vision and Lilith doesn't show up that way, don't worry about it. It's not a lie. It's not an entity deceiving you. I mean, it could be. I'm not going to rule that out for you because we've said it before on this podcast. Just because it's in the spirit world doesn't mean it's the nicest thing ever. But as a general thing in your practice, you influence the appearance. And so don't get hung
Yes.
up on that particular thing. There's going to be
You
more of
also
the
have to be
flow you're
aware,
feeling
though.
from. Yes.
I think you also have to be aware, though, that if you're working with an entity, and let's go with
Mhm.
Lilith because that's my preferred at the
Right.
moment. So let's go with Lilith. If you're working with the the mother, the compassion, the savior of the abandoned, etc., etc., then that's not all you'll get. You will get the other stuff too. So if you don't think you can handle the dark side, don't play with the light.
Right.
Be prepared that we've mentioned shadow sides of things before.
Mhm.
People, entities, you have to take all of the things. You don't have to work with all of the things, but you will feel the presence. It
Right.
will
And
show
they
up.
will work. Yes. You're asking them to do something, and they will do with their skill set what they can do.
And I would like to also add the bit, I think I've said this before in a podcast too, but yes, definitely we have. Um, it's a relationship. It's not a gimme, gimme, gimme. So if you're going with your hand out and expecting that you get favors and do nothing in return, that's awfully one-sided, and I don't think it's very healthy. So be prepared to build a relationship. You need to be paying attention.
Right.
And so what am I talking about? I'm not talking blood sacrifices. Okay, this is not blood magic is very powerful, but generally not necessary. So I'm not advocating for that, but what I am saying is perhaps the deity that you work with likes a certain incense or oils or crystals or feathers, salt,
Honey
dirt,
cake.
honey cake. Absolutely. That there are things that will be an offering, if you will, to that entity. And every religion does it. There's a reason the religions do it. It's because in spiritual practice, this is a give and take. You are preparing an offering to say, hey, I'm here and I appreciate you, and let's do this reciprocal thing. So, what is that? Well, there are plenty of books out there that will tell you this deity likes this, that deity likes that. And for the person who wrote the book, that is true. Um, and beyond that, figure it out for yourself. Like do some reflection, do some meditation, maybe do some dream work. Put a little mugwort under
Right.
your pillow or drink some mugwort tea and get a little lucid dreaming going and figure it out. What do you require?
You know what?
Green candles are typically abundance, for example. So if you're working for abundance, you might have a green candle, but what else do you need? Who are you working with for that abundance?
Yeah. To work with what Michaela just said, it's an individual relationship. And just like any individual relationship you have, like someone may like when someone like, you may be in a relationship with someone who likes when they get flowers, but with you, they don't ask for them because they don't need what the flower symbolizes.
Right.
So if so like isn't the thing, right? The people who wrote the book telling you what to use for offerings, well, that's what that spirit required of them, that symbol from them because they felt they weren't getting it. You can have a relationship like me if we did like a full documentary about how I deal with spirits and how my magic's been, I would probably contradict most books on magic because my relationship with the spirits I work with is very different. In that there's a lot of offerings I don't have to give because I have a different relationship because I'm giving something different.
Right. But you're still giving.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And that's my point. That's my point is there is a give and take. And the offerings is, well, I have years of study with Buddhism, for example, and I've done a lot of comparative religion stuff because I really do find it fascinating. But that kind of works for me. I like to have the representation
Right.
of offerings.
Well, yes,
Um,
and there's
and
that
and
too.
it
Yeah.
depends. And so, as an eclectic witch, some of it means I'm outside in nature, making a mandala from nature. Another time it might be candles and essential oils, and another time it might be salt and earth. Like it might be fire. It depends on what I'm doing with whom, when,
Hmm.
right? But that's typically how I operate because that's what works for me. The people who write the books that you can buy, and actually I have a number of books and I like them because sometimes I get some inspiration from those, but it's not a lie, it's their truth.
Right.
Okay, you're reading what works for them, or maybe it's a collection of things that they've put together from other people, but it isn't definitive. It doesn't mean that that's how you have to do it. Danielle does his very
Mm.
differently from the way I do mine. Yet we work together really well
Yeah.
and we play off each other very well. And sometimes when I'm getting the chaos going a
Mm.
little too much, Daniel comes in and kind of saves my tush a little and smooths everything out there so that, we can get a grip again and keep going. So, the differences are necessary. They're not bad and they're not incorrect or less than. All of that is language that we throw at each other unhelpfully. There's no point to any of that. So however it works for you is how it works for you. If
Right.
you're into water and air or fire and chaos,
Hmm.
or whatever it is,
Yeah.
you do you. And your
Yeah.
stories will reflect that. Some people are very calm, and there's a water witch that I know who's she flows, like she's all about the flow. She's like water. Her hair flows, like all of her flows. Her clothes flow. When she speaks, it's a flow. That is her. That is how she embodies that. And everything she does is with water flowing.
Right.
That's how she operates. And I've gone on a trip or two with her, and it's been amazing. Like, yeah, okay, I felt that. I was really in that, and I got that experience, and it's very cool. Not how I do it, but I can do it that way with her in that moment.
Right.
See what I mean? So there's different experiences. Being open to a truth other than the one you currently hold is helpful.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it, really. Like in human design, like we say, right? Everyone, the way you connect with people will show different behaviors. So when you're practicing magic with someone else, your magic's going to be different than when you're practicing by yourself, and the spirits will respond to you accordingly as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And if you're doing it collectively or if you're doing it on your own, this too is different, very different. And you can even coordinate across communities if it's a big thing that you're working on. And you can be fairly sure if it's a new moon ritual or a full moon ritual kind of thing, there are many, many people working on this. You might be seeking different things in your ritual, but the fact that the timing is such, there's a lot of things happening, there's a lot of power happening, and you can be pretty sure of that. But you don't have to only do things then. Like there's a cinnamon spell that you do on the first day of the month in order to
Right.
bring money. You know what? If you do it on the third day of the month, it's fine too. It's okay. Do it when you remember, it's fine too. Does it work? Try it and tell me. I'm not going to say, yeah, it does. No, it doesn't. Who's to prove it does and who's to prove it doesn't? But if you like it and you do it, there's an awful lot out there that agree with that. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
intention behind it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of words that go together with that.
Hmm. You made me think of something, Michaela. So when you're saying, right, when you work across cultures, as an
Mhm.
example, so this is where the story and the metaphor of the story is important. Find the metaphors in each of your stories that match. Because if you're going to be two people from two different cultures and you're going to work together, if you match your metaphors, so, if you come from cultures where your thunder gods are basically the same kind of entity, find that common ground. And then if you want to do a weather spell, then use that, that particular god. You can pray to, like, you can, because there's a chance it's actually the same entity to begin with, just,
Mhm.
in different. But the thing is, even if it's two different ones, if you match the metaphor, then you match the qualities and you match the ability to give and make that spell function, even if you're in two different places. Like, right, Michaela and I are doing this, and we're like, what, 1,000 miles apart,
Oh,
like,
more. It's
or
it's
more.
actually more like 2,500 miles.
Yeah. So, like, so, and like, right, this is Canada and United States, which are already huge to begin with. But if
And
you're,
I'm as far south as you can get pretty much in the US.
yeah,
So it's not much further south you can get.
right. So if you're in a, if you're like, because it's not just North America that listens to this podcast. Like, we've
Huh?
recently gotten Malaysia, Kenya, Taiwan, the Russian Federation have, like, it's been listened to there now. So you can be literally like continents apart And as long as you match up your metaphors, mystically speaking, so like I said, like someone can pray to Thor and someone can pray to Zeus, or you can do Odin and Zeus, you know, and still get the same effect because they still have similar metaphors. They're both sky fathers. They both have certain effect over the weather. So if you're doing weather, although using the head of a pantheon is probably a big ask, but you can
Right.
match the metaphors and you
Actually, that was a
can
really good point. That was a really good point. Matching the deity to the ask
right,
is helpful. Now, Catholics are very good at that with all the saints. You know,
right,
this saint for this saint for that. And that is actually a really good example of matching the deity to the ask and not just shooting straight for the top every time,
right,
because that's not going to work long term. At least my perception is it doesn't, because it seems to be too big, too much. You
right,
know, it's like if you read a book that's fiction and the writer is very dramatic, right? And everything's crushing or, enormously this or massively that, then you get bored really fast because there's no variation.
right,
There's no gradient to anything that's going on. So you can no longer differentiate between what's big important and what's nice to know important, right? Like you just get hit with this
mhm,
big thing all the time. And I can't read books like that. Like I have no tolerance for it beyond chapter one because it's just too much high pitch all the same time. And I think if you're going for the same top deity, if you view it as an
mhm,
hierarchy,
right,
then that too gets overdone. It's like, where's your variation? There are deities that are there for specific things,
right.
or they have specific gifts. Finding that one, creating that one even is I think a better idea. But that's my opinion. I just want to throw in a little factoid. When I was in South India, I discovered it was a discovery for me. Everybody that lived there knew this, but in Hinduism, you can create your family god.
Right.
Right? There are millions of gods in Hinduism. And every family can have their own. And how do you create one? Well, it was literally explained to me that you could have a milk carton and stick a straw in it and put a wreath of flowers around it, name it, and so long as you pray to it every day, that's your God. All right? It doesn't matter what it looks like. It could be a rock with an eyeball painted on it. And if you take that as your deity and the family treats it seriously, then that is your deity. That is your thing. So that is embodying exactly what we've been talking about,
Right.
creating the entity. Hinduism does it all the time. I learned this in South India and I was like, that is so cool. How interesting is that? So
Well,
you have the Hindu gods, right? The ones that people
yeah,
share, but you have your family god that protects you.
right.
I think it's
Well,
brilliant.
and that's actually something to remind people of, because that's actually across a lot of cultures, having your own individual God that protects your house, that protects your family. That's not uncommon.
Okay.
And then think about it, right? Like people are familiar with the idea of your own guardian angel, if in the very least. That concept is not lost in even in Christianity. So think about that. So even if you were to make like, okay, you make your family God, you put well, you've allowed the spirits around you now to have a metaphor to use. So when
Mhm.
you actually that what you've made now becomes the face that the spirits around you can use to speak to you or to communicate, to do what they need for you when you need them.
And it's where you focus your intention,
Right.
right? Now, for a witch, some people listening may have altars.
Right.
And it depends. Mine has, first of all, mine can move. Secondly, there's a lot of crystals involved in mine. And different crystals will be placed differently depending on many factors that potentially random, but it depends, is I think the short version. So that's what mine looks like. And I pay attention to the five elements and what am I placing for each of the five elements. But again, it's a focal point. right? So it could be a milk carton, or it could be, you know, a bunch of crystals and putting them in a specific arrangement. You know, I have flowers that I use. There's different things depending on what I'm working on, and it's good to change it now and then and not have it exactly the same. But the place to put your focus, that's what that is.
Yeah.
You
Well, you
know,
know,
you don't need a family chapel with an altar in it in order to pray, but it sure does help the focus, right?
right.
It's okay, I'm specifically going into this room to adopt this physical posture, looking at that painting or this cross or this whatever it is, and now I'm going to say these words.
Yeah.
And many of them will be the same ones you say every time, right? What is
Hmm.
that ritual if not magic?
Yeah. And it's interesting because just kind of not an aside, but actually going with it, right? So my altar, as limited as it is also where I record. I don't usually record
Perfect. I
anywhere
love
else
that.
when I record the podcast because when Blue and the Mama Dragon were both like, okay, here's your this place, this little desk you have for recording, that's your altar now. And I have my dragon little, well, now it's my candle holder, even though it was a pencil holder, and the necklace that for the Mama Dragon. I was like, okay, well then that's going to be my altar, and I'll record somewhere else. And they're like, no, 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 this is also where you're recording the podcast. So this podcast is also part of my magical practice.
I love that. I love that. But you know, you can have different things. You can kind of develop depending on what you're
Right.
working on. So I worked with plants for a while. So plants were actually my focus,
Right.
and I had crystals in the soil with the plants. And so there was a whole thing around that. And I haven't abandoned the plants. I'm just not focused on them as much, but they still have their crystals, and you know, and I pay respect to that.
Mhm.
And if I'm doing a mandala outside with things from nature, you know, that's all part of that deal. But I also have my altar with the crystals. There's just it doesn't have to look like anything. It just has to look like something that you recognize. And it could be piece of paper, it could be like a salt pot, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be elaborate, expensive, complicated, from a special store, like none of those things. So for the listener who would like to create an altar, what a fantastic opportunity. What do you like?
Yes.
Do you want a bowl of water to be in the center with some flowers floating on it? Or, I don't know, do you want salt water in a pot? Do you want earth? Do you want crystals? What do you like? Literally, it's yours to make. It's
Mhm.
yours to create. What are you working with?
Your
What
story to
speaks?
tell.
It's your story to tell. What speaks to you? Put that together and see how you interact with it. What does it bring to you?
Yeah.
Because I'll bet there's inspiration sitting there.
And that's kind of the idea of this episode is the people will maybe like even I did it at the beginning. Oh, I need a book with spells in it, and that's how magic works. And there's no other way of doing it. Then only to grow and learn that, oh, there's tons of ways of doing it. You don't even have to use formal spells necessarily. It's whatever gets you connected to the forces you're working with.
Exactly.
So metaphor is important because we're a storytelling species. That's how we engage all our resources. The more we are in tune to the story, the more captivated we are by the story, the more resources I have. Like, think about it. When you watch a movie, there's the phenomena of hypnosis that kicks in. You know, you're watching the story, you forget you're either in a theater or you forget you're on your couch. The story becomes all you're focused on. So think about that. That's what you're looking for when you're doing magic is that kind of immersion. So what I'm trying to kind of get at is those stories aren't lies. And when you're working with an entity, even if it's using a name and that or it's using a metaphor to present itself to you, remember part of it is you requiring that metaphor.
Mhm.
So it's not that you're being deceived or you're being lied to specifically, unless again that's the case. But for the most part, when you see this happening, it's not a deception, it's not a lie, it's not an intent to confuse you or to do anything to you. It's just this is how you'll work best.
Well, how many times do you get told something and you can hear it 10 times. And then on the 11th time, it's like, oh, I get you. That's what you're saying. Because it landed differently, maybe because the circumstances were different, or you learned some things in between time number one and time number 11, or maybe you were just in that state where you could receive the information now. But I think we all have that experience, right? So again, it's the way you need to hear it. It's
Right.
the way you need to interact with it. But I think I'm feeling really expansive right now. Like I'm feeling very um thrilled for people who are going to start exploring this. And when you look at your grimoire, which is your book of spells, it should, using the word should, let's should on you for a minute, but ideally, it should be an empty book that you fill. You put your stuff in there. Whatever that looks like Willa, if you've got your loose pages and
Mm.
they are stuffed in a binder, if that works for you, that is how your grimoire looks. There is again these arbitrary rules of it must be a pretty book or it must be this,
Well, right.
you've got to write it in a certain pen stroke or whatever. No, we're very rule bound creatures and we like to have all these guidelines, right? But what makes you happy and what worked for you, put that into your grimoire, however that looks.
That's important actually, because actually it's one thing that kind of I have a pet peeve about when I watch a like a fantasy story, but it's set in modern time or it's set even a little bit in the future. It's like, why are people running around in archaic armor and swords? Like, where's the magical guns? Where's the modern armor that's enchanted? Why are we all wearing plate mail? Like, what's going on here? And having cloaks and stuff.
Because limited imagination, maybe, or
Well, and that's the thing,
because
right?
that's
Because,
the metaphor that works for
yeah,
people, right?
right. Yeah. Because it's what you're familiar with. Because normally magical stories match the technology at the time those stories were created.
Right. It can be very interesting to look at those stories with a different perspective, right? Like see where things you can go with it and where it's like, okay, no, seriously, you lost the point here. But remember, the people who are putting those stories out, they're just telling you stories.
Yeah.
And typically they don't even believe the stuff they're putting there.
Right.
So,
And that's what I was,
you
because I
know,
was thinking, right, when we were, even when the first time we talked about grimoires, I was kind of thinking of like, if you've probably seen it at your work. I know in my work, as a, like when I was doing programming and stuff like that, I started having binders fill up with my notes, with, the documentation for the programs I've written, the diagrams for the websites I've designed and that kind of thing. And eventually you got like all these binders and it's all your notes and it's all the stuff. That's a grimoire. I mean, it's not magic, but but it's still idea. That's what a grimoire is. So I always kind of think when I think of like a modern magic user, especially like one that's very prolific. Like I always think of like you walk into someone's office and you've got like all these rows of these binders, basically numbered and stuff like that. But that's their grimoire. It's a more modern context of it, rather than
good way of
having
looking at it.
rather than having a leather bound book or whatever with all the filigree and stuff on it.
Now, if you want one of those, you can, but just be clear that you don't have to.
Right.
That's basically it. So if you've got a bunch of loose pieces of paper and scribbles and doodles and stuff on them, if that represents what's going on for you, then that's legit, 100%.
Well, technically, when I first started a grimoire, that was my grimoire. It was a little pocket notebook, and I would draw my diagrams and stuff like that that I was working on to make the magic system I did for beginners, the elemental based one. And I was going through because wherever I was, if I was bored, well, let's take it out, write some notes down, take observations and stuff. And
Mm,
that's what I was doing. So my actual first grimoire is actually a pocket-sized notebook.
there you go. No, it's great. I mean, how many times do we have notebooks when we're in school? Perhaps not these days because it's all computers, but back in the day where you're sitting there doodling and writing stuff out, and maybe you write maybe it's a poem, probably not something that rhymes though, maybe you just write some stream of consciousness stuff down. that would be a form of grimoire. Not a magical one though. Maybe grimoire is not the right word for what that is, but you get the idea. It transfers.
Right.
It's a grimoire is your collection of how you do magic and whatever that looks like. It could be a bunch of pressed flowers, like it could be
Yeah.
photos, it could be anything. We assume it must be written word, but not unless that's how it speaks to you.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, right, because we said it when we first talked about grimoires, right? We didn't use this particular wording, but it could be a crocheted piece on your wall. As long as it's a mnemonic device, is what you're looking
Ah,
at.
you just reminded me in Mahayana Buddhism,
Mhm.
the maroon colored robe monks
Right.
live in Tibet and high mountains. They have a lot of pictures, mandalas, and they tell a story. The Wheel of Life, it tells a story. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on in there. You've got a lot of information. It's in picture form.
Hmm.
For people who can't read, they can read those pictures.
Yep.
It's still rich. It's a rich form of expression that many people can associate with when the written word isn't necessarily a feature for them. We do get hung up on the written word, and how it's written isn't important. How it's spoken is.
Right.
That's where you give it life. That's where you give it power, is when you speak it. But how you reference it doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we had even spoken about using beadwork and stuff like that. You know,
Oh
we
yeah.
didn't go into that depth, but like the first bead can be okay. Well, like the images I got here, right? You can't see it,
Mhm.
but like the glyph or whatever you want to call it system that I've used for the basics for how to do the magic. Well, every element means something, and it means something in context of where it is. Because I've got a couple of overlapping triangular images, but where they are in the glyph tells you what I'm actually talking about. Because one is a protection symbol, and the other one, the same looking one in another place, is Earth, represents Earth.
You
So,
see, it tells you
yeah,
something. But if somebody walked into your space and looked at that, it wouldn't tell them anything. They'd just look and say, "Oh, that's cool."
yeah,
So that can be something that's interesting, attractive, valuable when you do your grimoire is, do you want to
mhm,
make it so that it's accessible for you, or can anybody access it?
right,
That might be a feature, depending. If you are a witch and you're living in a very Christian household, for example, pictures may be your friend.
yeah,
You may want to do something that's not written. That just literally came to me as an idea that could be of value to someone. If you need to keep it hidden in plain sight, then maybe use something other than words.
yeah. Well, and it's funny because like I'll write short stories for myself to help me focus on things, but when I brainstorm them, I draw pictures. I draw pictures to
Right.
brainstorm writing things.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on what your brain's wired like,
yeah,
right? Um, and that's great. We all have differences, but it literally just came to me that not everybody wants a grimoire that others can read.
yes. Well, because I was starting to think that too, because like if I just did what I thought using the glyphs for to do the magic, then no one would know what I'm talking about. But I would just look at it and go, oh, okay, I need this, 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 and this, because this symbol
Mhm.
means this, and when it's positioned here, it means that. Okay, perfect. No one knows it without knowing how I arranged it. But yeah, in fact, that's actually probably, well, I'll put it out there. Alchemy is an example of this because there's a lot of
Oh,
astronomy in it, but those things mean something else.
yes. No,
They're not literally
alchemy
telling
is
you to
all
look for
about
Leo.
symbols.
Leo is associated with something. Yeah. And,
Alchemy is all about symbols. That's, yeah, big time. Um, but yeah, it just occurs to me that maybe explore that. What else could it look like for you if you don't want
right.
something that, if you're living with your parents, for example, this is fine, but parents aren't always going to be on board with such things.
Right.
Some are, some aren't. Or if your partner isn't on board, or your kids, whatever it is that's
Mhm.
concerning you, if you feel like you need it to be not obvious, explore other ways of keeping that communication for yourself. It's a code, basically, right?
Yeah.
And it's a code that you have the key to. So, Danielle, if you want to share how you're doing a spell, then you would tell it to someone, you
Yeah.
would share it with them. You don't have to explain your symbols, right? Because that's still your language for
Right.
you. You can choose to, but you don't have to. That's my
Mhm.
point. So, I'm thinking it's going to be somebody out there is going to have a whole heap of fun. Just you have permission to do this. Whoever needs that permission, you
Yeah.
have it. Do it.
Yeah. I will say this as a note to parents. So I do mark the episodes as explicit because sometimes we do swear. Me specifically, for sure, you know.
I'm a
And
Brit, I swear.
yeah. So, but another reason is because typically I want the parents to be the one that the kids see as wise. So I would frankly rather you watch it or listen to this episode, absorb the information, learn from it, and then when your kids have questions, you answer it. Because one, it gives you the view, like they'll look at you as the source of wisdom. Even if you're getting it from me, we all get our wisdom from somebody, you know. We're not born with a codex, attached to us and gives us all the wisdom. So I would prefer that your kids trust you. And then when they're looking for help, they can come to you. Because if you make me and Will or me, you make me and Michaela the authority, then you're giving
They
up power.
will.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is for parents who are willing, for parents who are
Yes.
open to
Parents who are
this
willing.
subject, and frankly, they're not listening if they're not open. So, for those of you who are listening, um, you can take what's said and what's expressed and transmute it into something that can be received by your kid because you know
Right.
your kid. Nobody else does.
Right.
When I'm working with kids with autism, one of the first things I want the family to know is, look, I understand a lot about autism. I don't know your child. So, you are the expert on your kid, and we can work together to navigate what we're looking at. But you're all the parent, if they choose that role, and hopefully you do, then you are the expert on your child. And so, if this is something that you're interested for them to explore, or at least have the possibility to explore, then this is great because you can take what you're hearing and you put it into something that they can receive.
Yeah. Part of me throwing this out there, I kind of thought about it as I was saying it was, I'm going to assume a lot of people are going to listen to this and say, oh, and because I've actually said it, that I lean left. So, but I want people to understand that even if you don't lean left and we don't share political values, know at least this, that I'm a big proponent of parents having an input on their child because the child is in their care. Now, does it mean I recognize there are parents who, some of them aren't as fit as they could be. But I think for the most part, most parents are fit and they're looking for a way to help, even if they don't know it themselves. So part of on this podcast, I would like for them to take that information and learn from it, and then they can use it with their kids.
Mhm.
So yes, so even if you don't agree with me politically, for me being a filthy leftist liberal, know that I agree with you on the fact that parents should have some kind of understanding and some kind of input with their children.
Okay, and I'm going to play with that just a little
All right, go
because
ahead.
I'm also filthy left. But that simply means that I don't wish to control other people, which
Right,
seems to be a very right-wing kind of thing to do. Really bizarre to me. But the way I see it is fit parents, and I don't mean you can do push-ups, I mean you are capable of parenting. Those people should have as much input in their child's upbringing
right,
as reasonable because you are the parent. That's kind of your role. If you are not a fit parent, then I would like that person to be able to get some help so
right,
that they can become the person they need to be.
right,
It's always possible. And one of the things I find in my sort of behavior analysis work is a lot of people who really don't know what they're doing. And it can be for a number of reasons. Maybe it's the way they were raised was so off the wall that they can't use it, right? Doesn't work. So, but they have this story about, well, parenting's natural. You know, you have kids and you parent them. That's what everybody does. I don't need help, right? But that's typically not so. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to send kids to school because you'd
Right.
be able to do it all yourself, right? We do need help, and it doesn't mean anything bad about you, right? So my sort of view of parents have input on their kids is like with a caveat. As long as it's responsible input, it doesn't mean you are the boss of them.
Right.
You are the guide of them. You
Right.
have an adult in training. I like to refer to teenagers as adults in training. And if you insist your teenager does everything the way you want them to do it, you are not training them. You're not giving them the information they need to go and figure it out. So, there's a lot of things that we need to do differently these days from when we were kids because we
Mhm.
are a different species now. So consider all of these things and figure out if how you want to use them and help your kid to access them.
Yeah. I just want to put out there because I don't want people to feel like, oh, we could, oh, they're not going to agree with us. They're not going to say anything that's helpful to us because he's already declared his views. And when we talk about politics, right? But we typically go either side. We're not all that, impressed by. But just so people know
Oh,
that it doesn't matter what your politics are. We are here kind of, we'd rather support
there are
you.
huge problems on both sides.
Yeah.
Right now in the US, though, I think, yeah, there's more problems than usual on one particular side, but that doesn't leave the other one glowing shiny.
Right. So I just wanted the parents who are listening to this who may not share political ideas that we're here to support you guys too. Not in
So I'd be
judging ways
quite
or anything like
shocked
that.
if
Just
somebody far right is listening.
yeah. Well, I mean,
But
you have to look at it,
okay,
right?
we're talking two different countries here, right? And right here to right where you are,
Yeah.
very different rights.
Yes, but
Yes.
Canada, one of the big, well, I'm not going to go that deep into it, but when a right-leaning party is in charge in Canada and a right-leaning party is in charge of the United States, they cooperate.
And that is problematic.
And
Right
when
now,
there's
that would be
two
problematic.
left-leaning parties, you don't know.
Right.
There is a good chance they'll cooperate, but it's not a guarantee.
And they might not bother because
Right.
they each think they've got it sorted out.
Right.
So, as you said, both sides have issues, but
Yeah. But you're right. Canadian right is not the same thing as the American right. There are some
not at the moment.
similarities. At the
Try
moment.
and keep it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, the whole idea is that it doesn't matter if you agree with me, Michaela, on politics and stuff like that. Just know that this is also a place for you.
Yeah,
You're free to come
absolutely.
here and learn things, and there's stuff we agree with you on, the parenting.
But
If you
honestly, if they're
are,
still listening to us at this
yeah.
point, they're
If you got
already
this
good.
far into the episode,
Yeah.
yeah, because we probably put some barriers up in this episode to get to people not to get to this part. But if they did, hey, very
It's a very
appreciated.
niche, it's
Yeah.
a niche podcast,
Oh, it is. It's very, and yet we're picking up pretty fast.
Oh, that's good.
Every new
Niche doesn't
milestone getting.
necessarily mean small, it just means really defined.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got all that done. Yeah, I think unless you can think of something else, I'm not getting any more. I'm not getting any more things. I think we've covered. Yeah,
We've gone far and wide.
yeah. Just the idea is it's a
Mhm.
story. The spirits you're working with are not necessarily deceiving you just because there's a metaphor you need, and they're following that metaphor.
Yeah.
And even before we talked about that, look at your own stories. Why do you need
Yes,
them? What are
because
they
the
telling you?
lens
Yeah,
the lens you look through is based on the stories that you have made part of you.
right,
And if you're looking through a blue lens, then everything you see looks blue.
right,
See what I'm saying? So your lens, when somebody says something about you, for example, they aren't actually telling you anything interesting about you, but they're telling you a lot about them because they're giving you their perspective. their lens.
Yes.
So, that's kind of where we're going from here is uh, you have a lens and things will look according to that, and you need something that feeds into that in order to have the interaction.
Yeah. So take this. Know that everyone is welcome to listen. I'm not sure why that keeps coming up, but everyone is welcome to listen. And
Let us
so,
know what was useful.
yeah. And so, once again, I'm Daniel Dubois.
I'm Michaela Gaffinstone.
Until next time.
Until next time.